So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of a different way to think about game development. And it's probably not going to be that shocking to anyone. A lot of it's going to seem like common sense. But hopefully, the way I can kind of put it all together will make you think a little differently about how to interact with who will hopefully be your future customers. Traditionally, we think about develop a game, you test it internally, you show it to players and press in some kind of limited form, and then ultimately, it's out live. What I'd like to propose is involving players kind of at every step of the way. So at first, as soon as you're ready to announce, you tell players what you're doing. You start to talk about your game, build excitement. You leverage players as part of your beta testing to actually get feedback from them. Nowadays, we tend to use beta a little bit more as like a marketing tool rather than getting a ton of feedback from players. And then ultimately, even after you release, you keep iterating on the game. And you use players as part of this process as well once you're in kind of the live operations phase. So let me back up a little bit. You heard a brief introduction. I did start my career in games working on the Age of Empires series with Stuart. I graduated to World of Warcraft at Blizzard, where I was for 6 years. And I now work on League of Legends with Riot Games. I have always been very passionate about talking to players. Early on in Age of Empires, I can't even remember the decision. We were faced with a question, and we weren't sure if we should do one thing or the other. And I said, well, let's just ask players what they think. Let's get their opinion. And ever since then, I try to spend part of my time explaining to players the way we're thinking about League of Legends, why we do the things we do, why we value the things we value, answering questions, building trust. Here we are doing a live Q&A on Twitch. So League of Legends, hopefully you've heard of it, is a 5v5 MOBA game for the PC. It has many players around the world and a very active esports community as well. So I'm going to talk a lot about League of Legends. That's the game I work on, but my hope is that these strategies and tactics are relevant for whatever game you happen to work on as well. So overall, the outline of my talk is why leverage player feedback, channels you can use to reach players, strategies to use when talking to players, and then ultimately some risks that you will probably find along the way, as I have, maybe some ways to mitigate those risks. So number one, why use players this way? Why involve them in the development process to some extent? Well, they're very selfish reasons. It can make your game better. Ultimately, these are the people that you're going to want to play your game after you ship. And if the game doesn't resonate with them, if they're confused, if they're not having fun, that's ultimately going to show with lower engagement, lower acquisition, lower monetization. And if you can react to their feedback and kind of make them happier, hopefully you'll end up with a better game that is better for the very players you're trying to reach. And players want to help. If you've managed to get them excited about your game, they're invested already. They want to give you feedback. They want to give you advice. They're all kind of armchair developers and can tell you the right way to make the game. And so if you can figure out the right way to kind of harness that energy, it actually can help you improve your final product. Engaging at all by goodwill, like you're making the effort, if they feel like you value their opinion, that you can buy a lot of trust with them that can kind of help you with rough spots along the way. If your game gets delayed, if there are problems, at least they'll kind of trust your intentions. And cultivating trust buys a lot of room for mistakes. League of Legends and Riot both grew very rapidly, and we made a lot of mistakes along the way because we didn't know what we were doing. It was our first game, and it ended up much larger than we anticipated. But because we try to cultivate trust with the player community, when we do make a mistake, at least players will say, yeah, but I trust that Riot will try to fix this, that their heart is in the right place, they didn't want to inflict pain on us, and they'll eventually make it right. And that can kind of help you get through bad spells. I particularly want to call out, you will find certain players that want to be heavily involved, these kind of super users. Maybe they run a fan site, or maybe they're very prominent in social media or the streaming community. I know uses these community contributors who can kind of help be advocates. There are more of them than there are of you, so when you can reach out to some players, kind of get them to understand your point of view, then they in turn can help educate other players. When a player is saying, well, I don't trust the company's intentions, these player advocates can help explain, what your goals really were. So secondly, I want to talk about the different ways you can communicate with others. And there's kind of two big categories here. You can just ask them, you can, talk to them and get their feedback. And then the second one is you can observe them and gather data and analytics about what it is that they're doing. So first of all, I'll start with the top one. Social media is probably the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of us, and there's two categories here. There are the social media that we as developers own, typically like our own forums or something like that. And then there are all the various unowned forms of media, things like Twitter or Facebook, or we use Reddit a lot for League of Legends. There's always going to be a lot of players interacting in these communities. There's probably going to be a lot more of them. There's certainly be more than there are of you, and they don't necessarily understand what components of the community they represent. These are going to be probably more average player you might have on your game, and always understand that. I'll talk a little bit more about this. One of my favorite ways to talk to players is live, face-to-face. It's not a very scalable solution, but it can be really, really rewarding. When I talk to a player, I can understand what they're going through. I can say, oh, tell me about your favorite champions, or tell me what do you think we still need to do to make the game better for you. It again, selfishly, I get a lot of information from those. Even if it's very limited engagement, players are always really eager to talk, and you can kind of drill a little deeper than you typically can in an online conversation. You can also leverage test realms or beta or whatever system you use. I think typically these days, like I said, we use these a lot to build media buzz, or maybe to do hardware testing or make sure our servers don't fall over when the game goes live. But this is a great opportunity to still react to player feedback and try to get them to tell you, how are they thinking about your game? What is it that they don't understand or don't like, or parts that still aren't working for them? Riot leverages surveys quite extensively. We'll send out these micro-surveys, typically maybe with only a few thousand respondents. We could do this in different regions of the world. Maybe we'll release a new champion, and then right afterwards we'll ask players, hey, what did you think about this champion? Is this someone that you think thematically this is an interesting character? Is this someone you might like to play? We'll do this for like almost every kind of feature that we could launch, and then we can, sometimes we can get the feedback back so quickly that we can react. We try to patch League of Legends every 2 weeks. That gives us pretty frequent windows in which we can make changes if we detect that players are frustrated or unhappy about something. Now, secondly, you can observe what players are actually doing and then cross-reference that to kind of what they say they're doing. So they may say, oh, I hate that champion, I'm not going to play it. But then you can go look and see, are players actually playing the character after all? Analytics is the big tool here. It's typically pretty easy now to gather lots and lots of data about what players are doing. And usually the real challenge here is what you do with all of that data that you gather. With big data, the value is really in the interpretation. And I'll just walk through this example really quickly. This is win rate along one axis. So we try to have a 50% win rate for all of our champions. And then along the other axis is the number of games that a player has played on a typical champion. If you just look at the average win rate, you might say that, oh, these characters are all about 50% win rates. They're all on target. What you're really seeing here is that a character like Yasuo takes a lot more games to get to that point, whereas a character like Jinx doesn't improve that much at all. We recently updated one of our champions, Warwick. He was kind of before he was a pretty generic werewolf. I think he's a little better now. And that character was like, you would play 5 games and reach your maximum win rate, and that was it. You would master the character in 5 games, which is really pathetic. It's better than that now. But again, if you don't actually look, if you don't get a broad spectrum of what's going on, you might come to the wrong conclusion about the state of your game. We also have player labs. I heard a great talk this morning about some of the wargaming player labs. This is our studio in Santa Monica, California, where we'll bring players in and observe the way they play and ask them questions about what they're going through, try to understand in a limited environment. it's easier here to test things out that aren't live yet, and then hopefully, since the player's under NDA, information won't leak that we're still kind of just trying out. But again, don't use any of these forms of research in a vacuum, and it's particularly helpful to cross-reference with what players say they're doing with what they're really doing to see if you could kind of detect any problems that way that you might fix. See if their words match their actions. So then the basically development process that I would advocate here is you make a change, you gather feedback from players, you gather the data about what the players are doing, and say you changed an item, are players buying the item in the game? You changed, you wanted to make your game shorter, is that really happening? And then you keep iterating, you gather more feedback, you gather more data, and you keep iterating until you've kind of reached your goal, or maybe a point of diminishing returns. So next I want to talk a little bit about strategies to use when you're trying to have these conversations with players so that they're getting something out of the relationship, but you're getting what you need as a developer out of this too. There's a lot of ways this can go wrong, and I've done many of them. Above all, I would advocate have a strategy, like know what you're trying to get out of this situation. Are you trying to get players to understand your goals as a company? Are you trying to get a particular piece of information across to them? And I'll explain a little more about what I mean by this. What is it that you are trying to understand from them, and then what is it that you want them to understand? It's very easy to go out and just start gathering a lot of data and not really know what question you're trying to ask. So I would suggest always have questions before you start sucking in all this massive data that we're able to collect these days. It's very helpful to get players to understand your goals and values as a developer, as a company. What is it you're trying to accomplish with this game? What is it that your studio believes? Riot tries really hard to be very player-focused. So we want players to understand that we're making decisions, with their best interest in mind. And yes, we're a business and we want to make money so that we can keep making games for players. But ultimately, when players are frustrated, we've kind of failed at our goals. Try to get players to understand there is a process. In my experience, a lot of players, they engage with games heavily, but as a hobby, they don't necessarily understand what it's like to be in software development and how there are things like localization and bugs and hardware limitations and servers going down and DDoS attacks and all these different aspects. They say, oh, well, there's a problem here and there's an obvious solution, so why haven't the developers fixed it yet? A lot of times they might assign capriciousness where there really isn't any, where they think, oh, the developer's doing this just because they want to make money. The developer's doing this because, they show favoritism to this particular character, this particular champion. I'd like to stress these three things when you're talking to players in whatever format, whether it's, you're making a video update about the game, whether you're doing interviews or answering questions. Try to empathize with them. Even if you think they're being a little irrational, try to understand what got them to this place. Why are they frustrated? What is the pain they're feeling? And put yourself in their shoes a little bit. Even if you think they're wrong, it'll help you to understand how they got there. Stay humble. This is something that Riot tries to stress, is that we are not the VIPs. Players are the VIPs. We're there to try to make their lives better and to give them what they want. We try not to be the all-knowing academic in the tower or the voice of God coming down from the mountain. We're just people who like to make games as well, and we make mistakes, and we try to own it when that happens. Which gets to my third point about being honest. When you screw up, just admit that you screwed up. Ask for forgiveness and try to fix it. Don't try to hide your motives. Players are really smart, and there's a lot of them, and they will apply crowdsourcing to the problems and probably try to figure out what's really going on. Obviously, you can't share everything with them, and you can at least let them know, in general, what's going on. I find it's helpful to ask probing questions. Often when players reach out to us, say on social media, they're upset about something. They just had a bad game. They just ran into a player who was mean or abusive to them. They just lost, they're on a bad losing streak and they lost a lot of games in a row. And so they're upset or they're emotional. I try to get beyond that to understand, okay, I understand you're upset, but let's talk about what really happened, because then you're arming us as developers with information that we can use to maybe ultimately solve this problem. And do keep in mind that you may be wrong. It's very easy for us to go out there armed with all of this data and all of our experience as game developers and say, well, the players are probably wrong, we're probably right, but it can happen too that you were just totally off base and that your initial assumption about how the game would work or about how something was designed could be wrong. I want to talk a little bit about how to leverage your internal teams before you even go out to players. And often a lot of these same strategies will work just at a smaller scale. And you want what is the actual source of pain. You want to understand why the feedback is in a certain direction. You can use your own development team. If you have a publishing partner, you can leverage them. Many of us employ community managers in some format, and I'll talk about these in a little bit. So first of all, you have to play your game. If you're a game developer and you're not playing your game, it's very, very hard to make a good game. I know that sounds obvious, but I'm always amazed by people who get into this business and then kind of slowly lose touch with their customer and their community and their product. We try to play test our game. We'll make changes. We'll play test. We'll get an initial reaction because we're gamers. And if someone on the development team finds something frustrating or confusing, chances are thousands of players are going to as well. So you can listen to your development team. You can listen to people at your studio who aren't on the development team. If you have partners or a publisher, get them to play the game. Get the feedback from them. Give yourself time to iterate on that feedback before you go live to your broader players as a whole. I want to talk a little bit about how I view the role of publishing here, particularly kind of preparing players for the message they're about to receive. So what I'm trying to show with this graphic is players are at one location. They don't understand that the actual feature launch is going to come down somewhere else. So the role of publishing here can really be to kind of move players over so they understand what it is that's coming down the pike. You may not want to announce the feature in advance, but you can start preparing players, hey, this new feature that we've been talking about, it's really not for hardcore players. It's really more of an onboarding tool for new players, for example. Otherwise, when the feature lands, or if it's a brand new game, when the game lands, they might be confused or disappointed because they were expecting something else. You don't want to ruin the surprise, but you also don't want to disappoint them if the surprise is not at all what they thought it would be. So Riot doesn't actually have professional community managers. We had them at Blizzard, however. And they can be very useful if you have people who have a lot of bandwidth and can speak the language with players themselves to kind of engage with them on typically forums, but sometimes Reddit, other social media as well. If this is the main part of their job, they're going to have more bandwidth. I have a lot I have to do during the day just to kind of make sure the game happens. I still try to carve out time to talk to players, but I'm never going to have that much time. And community managers probably speak the language of players. This could be literally like, I don't speak Russian. The only way I'm going to be able to communicate with Russian players is if someone tells me, the kind of problems they're raising in the game so that we know about them. League of Legends is in, I don't even know, countries around the world. And while overall I would say gamers are gamers, and if gamers in one region have a problem, it'll probably show up in other regions as well. But there are regional differences that can crop up with things like holidays occurring at different times or internet outages or things like that. And it's easy to lose touch if you don't know what's going on in parts of the world. Now, the downside of managers is they likely have less context. They're not sitting in all of your development meetings. They don't know exactly the state of different features. At Blizzard, we would meet regularly with the community managers to answer their questions and try to arm them with information. Say, hey, this thing is going to happen. Players may be upset about it. Just wanted you guys to be prepared so that when you see it, you know. I want to talk a little about interpreting feedback. There's this old adage, I don't know exactly where it came from, that players are great at detecting problems, but they're not so great at offering solutions. So what you'll often see is players coming out and saying, oh, Riot, you guys should do this. And you're not sure what problem they're trying to solve, and you have to reverse engineer a little bit to understand what the problem is. I use this quote a lot. It probably actually isn't from Henry Ford, but it's still a pretty good quote, is if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So if you apply that to the player mentality, their problem is their horse is slow. Their solution is, oh, our horses need to be faster. But as a developer, you have more context. You can surprise and delight them. You can give them something they didn't even know they wanted, but solves the problem for them. Try to set the right tone with players. Again, be flexible, but don't suggest it's up to player vote. Unless it really is. Some developers want to totally outsource their development to what players are trying to do. For most of us, though, the balance of power is we try to make informed decisions. And the informed part of that comes from players, but we're ultimately, as the developers, we're making the decisions. You're setting your players up for disappointment if you make it sound like everything they suggest is immediately going to go into development. I mean, that's just not a realistic expectation. What topics are safe to talk about with players? At Riot, there really aren't any topics that are off the table. It's fine to talk to players about anything. We try to set up an environment where it's okay to, even if we can't answer the question, like, fire this person that I liked. It's not the kind of question we could answer, but we can at least talk about it and not ignore the issue altogether. And learn from your mistakes. Part of our philosophy at Riot is that if all of us are out there talking to players, some of us are going to say stupid things, but overall they'll understand and they'll get the message that that we care and that we're trying. So how do you know when to make a change? How do you know when you're getting this stuff coming at you from players when it's actually time to react? And I would argue if something is causing a lot of player pain, like something is preventing them from playing the game or preventing them from having fun, this can't just be someone threatening to quit. This should be like legitimate pain. Second, if the data suggests the problem is pretty widespread, you go and you've seen players raise an issue, so you go and compare it to your actual analytics to see if it actually is occurring. Third, make sure the player feedback is widespread. There's a huge echo chamber effect on the internet, and it's easy for a few players to sound like they're speaking for the entire community. That often isn't the case. And also, if you see the same feedback everywhere across lots of different media channels or across a lot of different regions around the world, then it's probably something that you need to act upon. So then why would you not make a change? Why would you decide, despite all of this information we have, the right decision is to do nothing? Maybe you're not convinced it's a problem yet, despite all the feedback and the data. You're not sure. Sometimes we'll see this manifest in champion balance, where players will say, oh, this champion is very unbalanced, but we suspect that really someone is about to develop a strategy that can beat that champion, and we just haven't given enough time to bake yet. Sometimes you just don't have a good solution. Like, there's a problem, but you don't know what to do, and I think it's a mistake in that point to just do something for the sake of doing something. Third, you may have a good solution, but it could be really hard to implement. Technically, it could be hard to implement. It may mean like taking your game down, around the world to reboot the servers or something like that. Fourth, sometimes fixing a problem could cause a bigger problem. And this is where you kind of have to trust your gut and his experience as a developer to know that like, this seems like a good fix, but it also seems really risky, and we could be causing something even worse if we try to make this change. And finally, you may just, that you have a bad system and you're about to go through some major renovation on it. We have a pregame system in League of Legends called Runes and another one called Masteries. They're both not very good systems, and we've announced to players that at the end of this year we're going to overhaul the entire system. So it's not worth like making small incremental changes to that system right now. It's just not a good use of developer time or asking players to relearn something when we're about to like throw the whole thing out. All right, and then finally, I'm just going to come at you with a list here of a few risks that I've seen, many of these are mistakes I've made myself, and then some ways to mitigate them. So number one, I mentioned regional challenges. You probably don't speak every language that your game is published in. Regional teams help. This is Riot's strategy, is we try to have an office in every region around the world where we have a lot of players to make sure we understand particular issues that are affecting only one part of the world. This is the challenge if you're an indie game. Maybe you can leverage a publisher if you have one. If you're true indie and you're doing everything on your own, but still trying to be pretty global, this could be tough to mitigate. Number two, players could be giving you a lot of feedback, but they may just be wrong. This gets back to the point I was making about they could be good at problems, but bad at offering solutions. And I would advocate in this point, you're not just making a game. Hopefully, you're not just making a game by looking at data. You're hiring experienced developers, or at least developers who are good at their job, have a lot of intuition. Sometimes their judgment or gut is going to say, you know what, I don't really think this is a problem. And you need to know when to listen to that and look at the data instead. I mentioned the player echo chamber. Found the most useful solution here is just to tell players, like, hey, Reddit, I know you think everyone on Reddit agrees with you, but when we look at different forms of media and look at players in different parts of the world, they're not experiencing the same thing you're experiencing. But also make sure that you're not part of that echo chamber. Again, it would be very easy for our largely English-speaking North American development team to only pay attention to North American players, but they're actually a minority of our players globally. Number four, sometimes you will be wrong. I advocated be transparent when this happens, admit it, but then also follow up. It doesn't help to just always apologize to players every time you screw up if they don't see you ultimately trying to fix it. Number five, you can't share everything. Now, presumably, you're developing some things that you want to make a big splash. When we release a new champion, we do it with just a little bit of teasing, and then we want a big buzz effect. So we don't want to focus test these champions to. Now, the risk here is that we don't have a lot of feedback from players to base it upon. We do a lot of internal play testing. We have a professional playtest team of high elo players and ex-pros who can play these champions a lot. That's going to be a small sample size compared to the millions of players out there once they get their hands on the game. So in this case, I advocate have a post-ship strategy. Talk about what are the risks with this launch, what are the kinds of things that might happen, and how we'll react when that does happen. You may find when there's a crisis then, rather than debating at the last minute what your goals actually were, everyone's already aligned to the goals, and you can just get to work on deploying the solution. Talking to players can be very time-intensive. Like I said, I try to carve off every part of my day to do a little bit of community engagement. It can take a lot of time, and I think the mitigation here is the product has to come first. It won't help you to have a great community if you don't have a game at the end of the day. You'll see this a lot with maybe developers who come onto your team with less experience. This can be very addictive when you get a lot of attention from players kind of hanging on your every word. You show up in a forum post, and all of a sudden, you're the rock star and you're getting a lot of attention. The key here is to try to hire people that have the right motivation. They're there for the company, they're there for players, they're there for the game. They're not there to kind of build their own brand. I talked before about some of the risks of being very data-driven when you absorb all this data and you say, oh, well, look, the data is telling us we have to make a change. I would just balance the data. You've hired people with experience. You've hired people with good judgment, and you have to match that. My boss at Riot tells a story when he drove into downtown Santa Monica one Sunday morning, and the parking lots there have a number outside that tells you how many parking spots are available. And it told him there were 0 parking spots available. And that was the data, right? Trust the data, it says there's no parking spots available. But his intuition, he's like, this is Sunday morning, there's no way the parking lot is full. And sure enough, he drove in and there were plenty of places to park. In this case, the data alone would lead you astray. In this day and age, it's easy to bury ourselves under data. And you can spend a lot of time just sorting through data, trying to figure out what questions you want to answer. I would encourage, if you have a business intelligence team or something similar, have them focus on answering questions, not just giving you raw data. Say, I don't want all these spreadsheets. I want to know, what's the average game length? Do players have too much gold? Do we have higher churn rates than we had a few months ago? Those are questions that are good that data can answer without just giving you lots and lots of pages that you'll never be able to get through. So in conclusion, I would advocate involve players as much as you can in your development process. It can make your game better, and it can help you develop a more resilient community for times when your game is not going so well. This strategy isn't easy, and there are certainly risks, but there are also a lot of benefits, especially when you want to have a long-term relationship with players. If you want a game that stands the test of time, you want a live game that's supposed to keep players engaged for years, or you want to be around and make games and many sequels and have players kind of trust your brand overall. Thank you. So I think we have a few minutes left for questions.
Hello, my name is Alexandra. Sense Vision Company, we do playtests as a professional agency. For the first of all, thank you so much. Your approach to player analysis is just great and very inspiring. This is what we do, and for the first time, probably not the first time, but not many people I've met in my life with such kind of approach. So thank you.
Thanks.
My question is the next. You do a lot of playtests. You recommend to do a lot of playtests, and you have a community managers. Could you please talk a little more about tasks that you solve with the community, with the feedback from community, and playtests? What's the difference between them?
We have at Ensemble, Age of Empires, at World of Warcraft, and for League of Legends, we actually had a permanent people on the development team whose job was just to play the game over and over again, give us feedback. You know, we'd make changes, then they'd try it again. Our designers can only play the game, say, 2 or 3 times a day and still have time to do implementation and bug fixing. But by hiring playtesters, they can play the game 6, 7, 8 times a day and give you very rapid feedback on things. Because the environment is controlled, because you can vouch for these people, because you can watch them playing, the data is a lot more reliable than what you'll hear from the community at large. And also, it's a good way to test things you don't want the community to know about yet. But our playtesters have been wrong too. Again, we may play 50 or 100 games of the new champion, but the minute it goes live, we're going to get millions of games. There's just no way to compare data sets of that size. So I would do both.
Good day. Greg, I want to ask you, how differs your strategies from region to region? How much local regional features affect to your strategies? And can you give us an example when you were forced to change your strategy because of local features, cultural or behaviors?
Yeah, I think overall, gamers are gamers, and we don't find massive differences from place to place. Times when it does come up, for example, a lot of players in places like Korea and Turkey still play in PC bongs, PC cafes. That's a very different experience where they are basically paying per hour as opposed to someone in North America or Europe who may have a computer at home. In World of Warcraft in particular, which was a subscription-based game, it's a very different experience when you're paying so many dollars a month to play at home or so many dollars an hour to play in a PC cafe. So we'd find different behaviors there where players wouldn't necessarily mind paying for power, for example, in a PC cafe because time is money in that relationship. They don't want to spend time working for something when they could just pay for it and get on to the part of the game they want to experience.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for sharing your approaches. Could you please maybe share some tips and tricks? How do you guys in Riot fight with toxicity among your players' community?
Fight with, I missed that. Fight.
With toxic players.
Oh, yeah. I mean, players are passionate, and they don't always know the right way to express themselves. And sometimes when they feel they aren't being listened to, the only tool in their toolbox is to, go hyperbolic, to say ridiculous things, to overstate it, to try to, they're yelling at you because they want your attention. And I try in those circumstances to make sure they understand we are listening, we are paying attention to what they're saying. You don't want to necessarily just reward, the loudest, most obnoxious player, because then you're just kind of setting, the expectation that that's how you get attention is to be ridiculous. So I'll sometimes jump in and say, look, we are listening. I understand you're very upset about this. It's important to us that you're happy, but I don't try to, to placate them too much.
Yeah, thanks for the info you shared. My question is, if there is some mechanic that caused a little problem at the start, but as the game flows and players learned it, it became a big problem, but they're very addicted to it and they're used to it. And you understand that you need to change it because there is a big problem, but players will be very upset with that. How you prepare them for these changes?
I think there's kind of two solutions. One is you really do need to make sure that it is causing a problem. I think sometimes I see designers who, players do something they didn't expect, and their immediate reaction is, oh, we have to fix that. Players are doing something different. And I try to say, well, wait, are they having fun? Are they causing harm to other players? Is this ruining the game? If not, that's fine. You know, they like to experiment. They like to try new things out. But for the sake of your question, let's assume that it really is causing a problem. I think, you know, try to be transparent with players. Try to get them to understand the situation that, I'll use World of Warcraft as an example. Players in MMOs often want rewards faster. They want to be able to get to the end quicker. And you have to explain to them, you're shortcutting the entire cycle of an MMO if you could just like finish and put it aside. Part of what makes an MMO work is that there's always something else you want to do as a player. And so if you kind of explain your philosophy and your goals, that again, they may disagree with your implementation, but at least they'll understand what you're trying to solve. Run into that all the time.
Hello. First
Hi.
of all, thank you for the talk. Really interesting. And the question is from practical side. Your community is super huge. And do you use any tools, automation, calculations, wherever, to measure the community voice? I mean, or is it all for like just reading and expressing themselves by people?
Really recently, we started to try to automate in a community feedback. And we were worried that we were super focused only on some communities, Reddit in particular, and we weren't capturing player sentiment overall. So we now have a report, and again, it's not, you know, it's not perfect because it's basically machine learning and not a human involved in it, but we can detect when certain spikes rise. Like if a lot of players suddenly start mentioning player behavior, you know, player toxicity issues. In any kind of online competitive game, there's always going to be an undercurrent of that. When there's a spike in it, then we know something happened. You know, something changed. Something we did is causing the problem to be worse, and we need to step in. And I think there's a big future in that sort of thing because, again, like you said, we can't keep up with the conversation. We don't always know where it's happening. Recently, we discovered that there's a League of Legends Discord channel that a lot of players jump into. We knew there was a Discord channel, but so much of the conversation was happening there, and for a while we didn't even know about it.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. It's hard to communicate with a large amount of players, especially when there's lots of cries of pain, which are always many in the big games, and how you keep yourself from burning out in that situation.
It's hard. For me personally, I get a lot of energy from talking to players. That's what motivates me. That's why I like to do things like this. And after this, I'm going down to our regional office in Moscow and participating in some player events just to understand, you know, what Russian players are going through. That I feed on that, and that makes me a better developer, I think, because I go back to the team and say, did you guys know that this was happening, that players are talking about this? I know it's not for everyone. People do burn out. I think I would encourage people on the team who are interested in community outreach to kind of go slow and steady and not try to stay up until 2 a.m. because they just had to finish this conversation with a player that had gone back over and over again. And remind yourself that if players seem frustrated or angry, you know, it's because they care. It's because they love your game and they just want to fix the problems they see in it. And if you keep remembering that that's why they're there, then it can help you, I think, from getting, you know, maybe bitter or jaded about it. All good? Oh.
Hello. Thank you for your talk. Great stuff. Can you please elaborate a little bit on where do you believe the feedback leverage ends and Reddit-driven development starts? Because, like, especially when we're talking about such a huge community as League, and that's internet, there's a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
And usually players don't go to such resources as forums and Reddits where they're perfectly satisfied.
Yeah.
Usually there is a pain point. And so where does this thing happen? Because looking at the data is good, but sometimes you need to act now or at least make a statement. But you never know where is this. This is very dangerous boundary. And
Yeah.
how do you guys balance on this?
So the surveys I mentioned can help because we can deploy those pretty quickly, and that's a good way to gather positive sentiment. Because you're right, players often go to the internet when they're angry about something. They don't usually go and say, hey, I'm having a good time, or even to say like, hey, I'm ambivalent. You know, you never hear that on the internet. So the surveys can help a little bit. When we need to reach a lot of players quickly, for Riot, I've found the most effective thing is to make a video recording. It's something they can see, you know, they can see the humanity, they can get the context. You don't have to wordsmith it to death. They know it's very real. You do have to localize that, which can take some time if you want to get a response out really quickly. And again, I think just trying to get players to understand your goals and your values, even if they don't like a particular implementation, they can at least say, okay, I understand what Riot was trying to do here. They totally screwed it up, missed the mark, but at least I understand where they were trying to go.
I was just curious how you prioritize the desires of your established player base versus the desires of your incoming newer players. Because a lot of times these are going to be fairly different sets of wants and needs.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the very pragmatic approach is it depends a lot on what your product lifecycle looks like. For World of Warcraft, as with many MMOs, you know, we had a fairly high churn rate, but a fairly high acquisition rate as well. So we constantly had new players coming in. We needed to make sure we were investing features to make sure that new players were having fun and felt valued. League of Legends was a very weird game for a long time where our churn rates were really, really low. And I know being free to play has a lot to do with that, but it's still, for a long time, we invested almost nothing in the new player experience because we didn't need to, because the problem was trying to keep all these players happy, not, you know, where do we find new ones. Recently, I think we have started to see, particularly I think with younger players, and I'm sure this has a lot to do with the rise of mobile games and maybe consoles as well, that we're probably going to need to start investing a little bit more in new players. We make a product for core gamers, for players who call themselves gamers, who engage very heavily with the game. So we always try to send the message that they're important to us, because they are. It's not just, not just lip service. We don't want our large player base to feel like we're taking them for granted as we chase new players out there. So we try to make sure they understand that our first loyalty is to them. They've been with us for a long time. They've been playing the game for years, and we want to make sure that they're still having fun. But different products are different. If you make a box product, then you only need it to be on the shelf for a year or so. You may make very different decisions.
First of all, thank you for great talk. My question would be just, if it's possible, to elaborate a little bit on the pipeline that you have for incorporating player feedback into development process. I mean, because it can certainly go in multiple ways. I mean, obviously, balance issues, because like this champion is OP or this one is OP. But sometimes there might be smaller things like player asking for specific features, or maybe you're not sure that this feature is needed and you want to kind of prove it with smaller data to see if there is need within the community for that. So, like, is there more specific pipeline on how you work with, like, that other data, not people telling you that champions are OP?
Yes, this is interesting. This last year or so, we had to invest really heavily in a new client because our old client was just falling apart. And it was starting, the game was built very quickly and grew very quickly, and we had to go and pay down some tech debt. But what that meant was we had a lot of engineers building a new client and not delivering new features to players. And we started to notice that player trust was falling a little bit because they realized they weren't getting new stuff. And we could say, hey guys, a new client is coming, a new client is coming, but that's only so exciting to players. They don't know what they're really going to get out of the deal. So we, kind of as a tactical solution, we made a punch list of low-hanging fruit, of what are some features players have been asking for a long time that are fairly easy for us to develop, maybe only a few weeks of an engineer's time. We made some changes to like letting you ping wards, which is, if you play League of Legends or MOBA, you know what that is. It'll take me a little while to explain it otherwise. But it was a feature players requested that didn't take us that long to implement, that we used kind of to help buoy player trust a little bit during a time when they weren't going to get a lot of new features. And we always try to keep a little punch list like that of something players have asked for a lot that is pretty easy for us to develop. If it's a really big feature, that's going to be harder because then it's going to compete with some of our other priorities. And we couldn't put the client aside so that we could develop some of these other things.
Hello, and thank you for your talk and your work in general. And I wanted to ask again about toxic players. Because of the recent scandal with PewDiePie, I don't know, did you hear
yes.
What happened? Yeah. I wanted to ask, should developers sometimes step in situations like this and do these public executions of players that being rude and in general offensive? Thank you.
I mean, I think developers do have a responsibility if some players are making an experience bad for other players, particularly within the game. We don't own the community. They're their own people. We don't own the internet. So I think you have to be careful how far out of your way you want to go. If it's within the game or within social media that we own, we can be pretty heavy-handed. If it's something that's happening out there, in YouTube videos, we can express, maybe those aren't our values, but it's not our place, I think, to police that. We do try to have company values, things that we care about, and we're pretty honest about what those are, so that players would understand. Things like racism are not tolerated in League of Legends, despite what individuals might think. Multiplayer, particularly multiplayer competitive games, are stressful. Players get frustrated. Players have bad days and want to lash out sometimes, and we try to separate someone who had a bad day from someone who's just being a bad member of the community, someone who's out there who is motivated by causing pain in others and would take a much harsher stance. Those are the kind of players we're kind of okay losing because the rest of the community will be better overall.
So that's all we have time for. Greg, thanks.
Thank you very much.
here with another one of the participants on 4C. Hi, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jean-Philippe Morel from Ubisoft Montreal. I'm working on Rainbow Six Siege.
Very nice. What was your first video game ever? Do you remember it?
Oh my God. I did a port of a very... Oh no, I don't want to talk about it. It was called War Chess. I don't know if anyone knows about it, but it's just a port of a PC game to console game on PS2 like 15 years ago. But my first real game, I would say, was I worked on Prince of Persia, several Prince of Persia at Ubisoft.
That's very nice. What was your first video game that you've played?
Oh, the first that I've played? Oh. On the Atari 200. I don't know if I say it correctly in English. It was called Smurf.
That's an old one.
Yeah, it's a real old one. Yeah, it's an old one.
And well, now that the time has passed, what's your favorite video game of all time? Do you have one?
Of all time? Oh my God, that's a good question. I would say I spent a lot of time playing Unreal Tournament a while ago, but yeah, Unreal.
The very first one?
Yeah, the very first one. Yeah.
Absolutely. What led you to the video game industry? How did you come here?
Oh, it's a technical challenge. The technical challenge is I first wanted to make graphics, but I realized that was not really my thing. I like to build machines, like machines that can scale, that can live for a long time. The technical challenges in video game industry is...
now that you're in it, what's your favorite thing about the industry? What do you like most about it?
It's the same thing, exactly what I said. It's building machines, building bigger machines, machines that scales. I'm not even that interested in the nature of the game. That may disappoint you, but it's more the machine that I'm building that interests me. And I have a lot of creative people around me to make some good games.
So it's the technical side of things that you're into?
Exactly.
All right. So anything you particularly don't like about the modern state of the industry, maybe?
I worked with really, really big teams. It's not really that I don't like them, but I prefer some smaller scale team, probably. But that's the first thing that comes to my mind. What else? Oh, that's pretty much what I'm thinking about now.
Fair enough. Let's make some predictions. What do you think will be the new thing, the new big thing, the new trend in the gaming industry in like 10 years' time?
Oh, in 10 years' time? Well, I won't say it's new, but I think there will be more and more games that lives for a very long time, that evolves, that over time, and I think that's a trend that will continue over the next years.
Do you think it will be like a breakthrough point through some game, or it's just going to be like a slow progressional evolution into this state?
I think it's going to be a slow evolution, and I think it's going to be a slow evolution mostly because we need to adapt to that kind of mentality in the game industry, and
fair enough. If you had absolute creative freedom, which I don't know, maybe you have, but still, like absolute creative, financial, professional freedom, what game would you like to have made?
I will keep that secret, if you don't mind.
We almost had an announcement here.
I have good ideas, but I will keep that for myself.
Okay, but that's a secret then. Is it a secret on what do you think is more important in games, like graphics or gameplay, or maybe the storytelling?
No, I think it's everything is building a community and make it that community grows and grows and grows, and make that community grows over time, and so we can build on that for many years on the same kind of titles.
Okay, great. Let's return to the real world for a second from video games. We're in St. Petersburg. What do you think about the city?
Oh, we had a good time yesterday. I was just trying to find good place to go, and it's awesome. We had a tour of the whole city. We had a boat trip. It was awesome. It was awesome, really.
Right. What about the event itself for C? I know it just started, but still, any impressions?
Oh, I can't wait to see. I can't wait to see the talk Friday and Saturday. I want to know more about, what people think about the future of gaming industry.
Maybe something specific you're looking forward to, some specific speech or lecture?
Yeah, I'm very interested about monetization. How monetization, I told you I like big machines, build big machines, and monetization is something that we need to learn a lot. How it works, how we integrate that to game, and I'd like to see how other developers are doing that. Some massive online infrastructure. Also, I want to see. I want to hear more about that. How people are doing that.
If you were interviewing yourself right now instead of me, what would you ask yourself?
At what time is the party? Saturday?
Well, I guess you'll have to answer this question yourself. Either way, I have you have a great time at the party, and you have a great time at the event itself. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you very much.
So we keep catching our speakers in the hallway and putting cameras in front of them. Hi, please introduce yourself.
My name is Samuel Ranteskla. I work for Microsoft as a principal program manager out of Sweden.
Okay, Samuel, so let's talk about games. What's your favorite game?
Well, I wish I played a lot more games than I actually do. So I have to go back into the past. Like, one of my really favorite games is Jag the Lions 2 from like 92, 93. I think it was made here in Russia, if I'm not mistaken. Civilization, always been a big fan of that. And then the Enemy Unknown UFO trilogy from the 90s. There's so many games, I mean, it's like impossible to select one. But they're all strategic games, the ones that are my favorite.
Yeah, you're obviously a tactician. That's commendable. But do you remember the very first game you've ever played?
Decathlon, probably on the x86, somewhere around 84.
Wow, that's... I don't even remember that one.
It's like you basically play Decathlon and you just hammer at the keyboard to go faster, like 10 different sports events. Played it like crazy. I was 8 years old then.
Wow. How did you get into the gaming industry?
It was by chance, actually. So I was studying at Uppsala University, doing computer science, and they had this fair where companies were meeting the students. And there was these two guys that they've started a game company in the basement, and they wanted somebody to write a BSP tree, binary space partitioning tree. And I was looking for my thesis, so I figured let's combine those. So I joined them, I wrote my thesis in the games industry, and then from there on kind of like just went on. So this was 2000.
But now in 2017, what's your favorite and least favorite thing about game dev?
I mean, I think the games industry is awesome. Great place to work. There's so much passion. There's skilled, very intelligent people. I think that's my favorite thing. The least favorite thing is that, which I covered in my speech a little bit, I think that we're looking a little bit too much at how do we turn time into money, rather than seeing like how do we educate our kids. I really want to, that's my passion myself, is like take this experience, make our kids better tomorrow than they are today. I'm a parent as well, so that's coming from that.
Well, that's a very noble thing to do.
I don't know if noble, just I think it would be a good thing for us.
Definitely is. About your speech, did you have any interesting questions that maybe stood out?
Yeah, there was some interesting questions, like if we look at mixed reality, what's going to happen with that? What's the dangers with that? I couldn't really answer them because let's see what happens.
But if you were a part of your own audience, what question would you like to ask yourself?
That was a tricky one. Are you sure that you're right?
Are you?
No.
Well, we can be sure 100%, but still, we're trying to foresee the future here. How do you like the conference?
Love it. St. Petersburg, great place, wargaming, excellent hosts. It's a great place to be. You should come to the next one.
Definitely do. Say, if you had the chance to go back in time to when you just started working in the industry and give yourself one advice, what would it be?
Try one of your ideas out.
That's very good. Thank you very much, Samuel. I hope you like the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.